We're talking about character creation today, so if you have no idea how to build a character for mythology retellings, we've got you covered. Hey y'all, and welcome to my vlog. My name is Erin, this is Kat, and this is Demystifying Mythology. Kat is one of my fabulous critique partners, and we have teamed up for this series to help you with your mythology retellings. Today we're talking about character creation. This topic was requested by one of my patrons, Casey. She wanted to know about mythology retellings, so I recruited Kat to help me out.
If you haven't already checked out the first 3 videos in the series, you can find the links down in the description. And you can look forward to more videos on world building, modern versus ancient morality, and writing mythical romances. If you have other suggestions on things that you'd like to see regarding writing and mythology, you can leave comments down below and we'll check that out.
Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ring that bell so you always know when a new video is uploaded. And I'll have a link to Kat's channel in the description below, so if you are not yet subscribed to her, get on that. Your main character is the focal point around which your story spins. Because of that, it's important to decide early on who your main character is going to be and how their point of view is going to affect the story that you're telling. If your main character is human, they're obviously going to have a human perspective, but if your main character is a god, they're not going to have the same worries or motivations as a person might. Who you choose should reflect the plot that you want to follow. Why did you choose your specific leads? The leads in all of my books are gods. Those just happen to be the myths that intrigued me enough at the time to actually write a book about them. I started with the leading ladies of each, Persephone and Hera. They are respectively a woman who is stripped of her agency and a woman who is basically blamed for everything. I wanted to fix both of those things. The other POV characters that I have are Hades and Iris. Hades naturally fit as a counterpoint to Persephone because their stories are very intertwined. Iris in the mythos is Hera's personal messenger, and in my story, she is also one of her dearest friends. Iris has access to the world in a way that Hera does not, so I needed her both to give readers that access and also to have her relationship with Hera support the story.
I have a similar reason for choosing Sigyn. Initially, I was really enamored with the gaping holes in Loki's story, and I wanted to find an angle that nobody else had really explored yet. I ended up choosing Sigyn for a ton of reasons, but it boils down to a few main things, so just bear with me while I nerd a bit. Sigyn has only one story about her in canon Norse mythology, but that hasn't stopped people from coming to conclusions about her. There are 3 common beliefs that I've seen while browsing through pagan discussions. 1, she was given to Loki as a child bride, which just fucking ew. 2, she was a victim of an abusive relationship with Loki. And 3, she loved her husband and was loved back. Take a guess which of these opinions come from people who worshipped Loki. Sigyn was basically a blank slate, and I wanted to explore what living with and loving Loki would have been like. I wanted to give them the complicated, nuanced life that the myths alluded to, and see what their relationships and their choices were like in a world that painted Loki with a broad brush of evil.
How do you choose a main character? Choosing main character is one of the more difficult things for us to help you with because it is such a personal choice. If you're having trouble nailing it down, consider what's most important to you. First off, do you want your character to be a named figure from mythology, or do you want to write about someone totally original? If you want an original character to be your lead and you want to surround them from figures from mythology, you can absolutely do that. Maybe you'll write about a palace servant that is privy to all the gossip of Agamemnon's court, or a laundress that knows the literal and metaphorical dirty laundry of everyone in Asgard. Your characters don't have to be involved in the myths to still be part of the narrative.
If you want to write about somebody who already exists in the mythology, are they a lead character or are they more on the sidelines? Characters who already have a lot of mythology written about them can be both liberating and limiting to write about, forcing you to do extra research and contend with already existing stories. If you want to focus on someone who's more of a minor character, you can draw them to the forefront while still having the flexibility of their nearness to the canon. There is no shortage of characters who are merely mentioned in the mythology who have no story about them. You have endless opportunities to explore these characters from their own perspective. If you want to write a love story, looking at different couples from mythology can give you a good idea of where to start. If you want to write about warfare, there are plenty of existing battles to choose from. So find yourself a character who can sit at the middle of the story that you want to tell.
How do you choose your supporting cast?
Let's start with the obvious part. Gods. Unlike a story that you create from scratch, mythology retellings have all these characters that are pre-existing, and some of those characters are gods. Some stories have the gods as amorphous characters who are talked about but never seen, because the plot is about culture and not about the gods themselves. On the other hand, your characters might actually be the gods or the children of gods. Your options are limitless.
So what parts of the pantheon do you include in your story? If you're not familiar, a pantheon is just a collection of gods within a mythology, pan meaning many and theos meaning gods. gods. Most pantheons consist of an expansive list of characters. While most people are likely familiar with the very popular figures in mythology, it's very likely that there are thousands of minor gods and demigods, primordial beings, etc. If you don't want to be bound to the most common or well-known figures in the mythology, the possibilities of choosing anyone else are limitless. The most obvious characters that I included in Hades and Persephone besides the leads themselves were Demeter and Zeus. Those two are basically chaos catalysts in the original myth. If I didn't have them, then writing a mostly accurate myth wouldn't work at all. Some of the side characters like Thanatos and Charon existed in the mythology, but I controlled their personalities. And others like Chloe and Evaristus are complete fabrications and just friends I created for the story. In HERA, the other major figure is Zeus. He's the antagonist and he is the major factor in the plot. I also included HERA's nymph mothers as well as her sister Hestia to be her support system as well as her initial motivation for people that she needed to protect. Others that I chose to include were pulled straight from the mythologies where HERA is mentioned, such as Heracles, Hephaestus, Ares, and Aletheia. I also broke canon and included the twins Prometheus and Epimetheus, positioning Epimetheus as a love interest.
When I started my first draft of The Goddess of Nothing at All, I was determined to include every single member of the Norse pantheon. I made a list of all the gods and every event that they took part in, and I jammed everybody in. In later drafts, I ended up combining a couple of the lower tier characters into one character in order to make them take up less space in the plot, or just never shining a light on ones that serve no particular role. Instead, I chose to focus primarily on Sigyn, the MC, Loki, their closest friends, and the people who most directly opposed them. Cutting out or refusing to focus on important gods in the pantheon that didn't really play a role in Sigyn or Loki's story streamlined everything immensely. This might be extremely obvious to experienced writers, but it can be a confusing moral question to someone who's trying to deal with mythologies and knowing who is or isn't important to include.
How do you write a god?
That depends. Greek gods might be viewed as all-powerful, where Norse gods were presented as more human in nature. Pantheon you choose, the way you choose to present them, and their involvement in the story will change a lot about your plot. Like all characters, your gods should be three-dimensional beings with flaws, interests, problems, and complex inner workings. Anchoring them in the world will make them more accessible to your readers. Do they understand human morality and laws? Do they obey those things? What matters to them on a large or small scale? What poses a threat to them? And what is their personality like other than ethereal and godly?
The elephant in the room is obviously godly power. If you allow the gods in your stories to be all-powerful, then you can run into some issues. If Zeus can throw lightning bolts and control the weather and mimic voices and shapeshift, it's not long before he becomes a Gary Stew that can't be defeated. It's important to give your god characters weaknesses, whether those are pre-existing or not. If Zeus is your main character and the reader knows that he can't be defeated in battle, then there's not going to be any worry or tension there. Readers like seeing characters fail and strive to succeed. This makes them both realistic and relatable. Bulldozing their way to the end without any consequences is not. How I combated this in my stories is that I limited the gods' powers to what they're the deity of. So yes, Zeus can control weather, but he can't control fire, he can't heal, etc. They can all use telepathy, they can all teleport, and they have basic powers like that. But only a few of them have specific powers like healing, so if someone gets grievously injured, yeah, they might not die, but they're for sure gonna suffer for it. There's also higher powers to consider. In Norse myth, the gods need to consume the golden apples to maintain their youth, and in Greek mythology, even gods are bound by an oath on the river Styx. In my version of things, breaking an oath on the river Styx will basically tear a god out of existence. There should always be ways that your godly characters can be taken down a few pegs as the plot requires. How do you write original characters?
A lot of this logic applies to general character creation as well. There's a lot that can be said about that, but we're going to focus on characters that relate especially to mythology. First are some of your characters from mythology in general, like Medusa, Sigurd, or the Minotaur. It's going to be important to do your research to get a baseline on what those characters were like, what they did, how they lived and died, etc. From there, you can decide whether you're going to leave that story more or less the same, or try to flip the narrative, which we're going to touch on more in a moment. It's generally important to keep some of their defining features. Even if you're going to plan to make a modern alternate universe version of the Medusa story where she owns a coffee shop, she should probably still be able to turn shitty clients into stone statues with her hair when they complain about their latte. But what about original characters? You're going to have to work them into your world building a little bit. Decide how they fit into the mythology. Are they humans or magical beings? How do they relate to humans or gods? What part of their personality or their physical presence makes them unique? What purpose do they serve in the world, and what impact will they have on the plot and the mythology itself?
The completely original characters that I created for Hades and Persephone that actually play some kind of role in the plot are Chloe and Evaristus. Evaristus is Hades' personal assistant, household manager, and confidant. Hades runs his kingdom in a very organized manner, and while he's busy taking care of souls, Evaristus is busy taking care of Hades. Chloe is one of the nymphs in Persephone's entourage, and while the nymphs therein are original characters, Chloe is Persephone's favorite and definitely the one with the most lines. In the myths, Persephone is with her nymphs in her meadow when Hades comes out of the underworld to greet them, or in some versions kidnap her. So the nymphs themselves do have a place in mythology, but the actual characters of each individual nymph are fabrications. And if we're talking about original characters in the sense that they have names in the original mythology but no personality or anything happening, that would cover most of the rest of the cast. I expanded tons of other characters that might be named in the mythology but we don't know anything about them, such as Hera's nymph mothers. Your leads need a supporting cast of friends and family, and you can choose to work within an existing framework for that, or you can introduce new characters to the mythology.
Arguably, original characters can be the most difficult to finalize. Thor and Loki were easy for me to write. There have been so many iterations of them over the years that I already knew exactly what kinds of attributes I wanted to focus on and who I wanted them to be. I already understood their relationships to each other, the way they function in the world, and how they would react to certain things. That wasn't true for Sigyn. In early drafts, she was much more timid than she is in this nearly finalized draft. She made very few choices of her own and let other people drive the story for her, which was partly due to underdeveloped writing skills in the beginning, and partly because I didn't understand her as a character. Every new draft that I wrote and the more time I spent with her, the more I understood her. I was learning more about who she was and what she wanted and what parts of her story were most important.
How do you flip narratives? One of the recent and most fabulous trends in mythology retellings right now is flipping the narrative. Mythology tends to tell a story from one static perspective, and since we know that many stories were from a cis straight male view, many people are now starting to look at these stories and tell them from the perspective of characters who may have gotten the short straw. A popular one is Medusa. Was she a faithful priestess who was assaulted by Poseidon, or was she flipping the bird to Athena and having sexy times in the temple? Did Athena curse her out of spite, or was she giving her the power to protect herself? There are multiple books out there who are giving voices to the oft-ignored women of mythology. They're telling the stories of Briseis, Cassandra, Circe, and more. This provides a platform of different understandings for how history would have or could have been experienced.
Other narrative flips might include making a character openly LGBTQA+. Mythology around the world is full of characters who would today be considered part of that community. Maybe you want to write a story that highlights the characters from that perspective, or explore their relationships from different angles. What about a pantheon-wide gender flip? Did Zeus really rule Olympus, or was Hera pulling the strings all along? The options are endless. One of my favorite narrative flips is where you have an unreliable narrator, like in The Gospel of Loki by Joanne M. Harris, where we have Loki telling his own story and you can't tell if you should trust him or the other people involved.
Other tips for mythological characters. Remember to consider them as whole characters besides just what mythology tells you. What are their desires and motivations in the original mythology, and what are they going to be in the story that you're telling? Do they have the same relationships as in the myths, or are you going to be changing those? How will that impact the character and the story if you make those alterations? How do your characters' motivations, goals, and morality compare to today's morality? You have plenty of flexibility when it comes to creating characters or modifying existing mythological figures. Don't be afraid to play with these ideas. You can do pretty much whatever you want so long as you balance your creativity with the occasional nod to canon. So that is all we've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Casey for requesting this topic. Links to her social media will be in the description below, and if you would like the opportunity to request a video topic, you can do so on my Patreon. We've got lots of fun stuff going on, like a private writing group, early access to videos, chance to request topics, and the opportunity to have me help hash out your story. Thank you so much to Kat for joining me. I'm super excited for more episodes. Kat, tell everyone where they can find you.
I have my own channel where I talk about tropes, the writing process, and occasionally book marketing psychology. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, both under the handle @Rector, and you can find the links down below. Sometimes I post about writing, and other times I'm just fangirling over a game or a book that I like, and you're free to join in.
You can check out all 3 of my books, Olympian Confessions, Hades and Persephone, Olympian Confessions, Hera, and Heart and Soul. The first 3 chapters of all of them are available for free on my website. Relevant links will be below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, then ring that bell. All our social media links will be in the description below. Follow Kat to get updates on the Goddess of Nothing at All. I will see you next week for another video, and we will both see you in the next installment of Demystifying Mythology. Bye!